And once again, everything's on a delay. Okay, that is cool. We've got that straightened out. Now, like I said, typically I'd rather be way more prepared for this, but I did mention something to my players that if you don't just try something at some point, you can't possibly succeed if you don't just give something a chance. So if I'm going to say that to them and I'm not going to kind of follow it on my own, then I guess that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the idea tonight, I've been wanting to do this for weeks. I think it might be a better format than just putting up graphs that don't necessarily mean a whole lot without context to go with it. And I realized that trying to prepare was going to be impossible if I didn't just set it up and do it. So this first one's probably going to be pretty rough. So we'll try to work out the kinks. At any time, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the comments. I'm going to have a lot going on as I try to get used to going between a couple screens and also trying to do some actual visual attention to the camera and everything like that. So we'll make it through. It's only midnight. I should probably have a beverage with me, but I'll worry about that if I get thirsty. So I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to switch us over onto the data scene. I'm going to double check the microphones, make sure I don't have duplicates on so we don't end up with any kind of echo again, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start going through the data. And I'm going to try to have my data all up on the monitor to my right, and then over here I'm going to try to have the Facebook Live page. And it's going to be a little choppy because after I do the data, I want to go to some other websites and talk about some different things that involve the data. So you're going to have to kind of come along with me, and we'll pull up another window and I'll look everything up and we'll kind of walk our way through that way. So by then it should be, probably 1 a.m. or something like that, and it'll all just be goofy, but we'll try to make it work. So I'm going to transition us over to the data. Okay. That actually looked like it worked, but I have camera mic was on. I turned that off. We're down to just from my regular microphone, and we're on to the data. So I'm going to turn off the software that I'm using to make everything here work on the stream and simply go to my live setup. All right, we're up to 15 people, and that's actually pretty cool for being this close to midnight. But I wanted to just say I'm not going to have any idea who's watching unless you make a comment. So if you want to check in, I know some of my players were looking to laugh at this as much as they possibly could. So you can feel free to check in if you're still up, and we can chit chat just about over anything. So check in. You can go ahead and ask a question if you have any kind of questions at any time. I don't know how much of that I'll get into, but I don't know. We don't got practice tomorrow, so I can sleep in a little bit. I don't mind staying up for a little while. So I guess there's no time like now to try to start getting into the data. Now I'm going to try to follow the same pattern that I have on just the data updates that I put on Facebook. So I'm going to try to follow in my head by memory how I usually would write those up. And I believe the first thing we always did is every time I take a look is at the growth rate. So what we're looking at here is literally just a window capture of everywhere that I keep the data in Google Sheets. So for those that are unaware, what I've been doing. Kaylin, what's up? That's fun. Good game tonight. And you're allowed to stay up as long as you want, assuming your parents said it was all right. But Kaylin Felty's on. She's one of our players, and awesome. Got a lot of good kids, and they're going to really have a good time making fun of me on practice on Sunday. But that's all good. They earned it because they went out and rolled Pottsville tonight at Mart's Hall. Not a lot of people there, and that was really kind of weird to have Mart's Hall be completely empty, and it was freezing because for whatever reason they decided to not put any heat on if it's only going to be players and coaches and things. So it was a rough environment, but at the same time we brought it, and Kaylin brought it and had a bunch of rebounds, had a big three from the top of the key, and that was pretty cool. And you know, she's got a couple years left at Pine Grove, and she's going to make a mark, and that's all pretty cool. So back to COVID stats. This is all the stats that I've been keeping. We're almost going to hit the year mark here in about another 3 weeks or so. So essentially all I've ever done is take the date. I get all the infection numbers, infections, we've got fatalities. This is all kept on a couple different databases. So I'll pull it from Worldometers, which is probably one of the better known ones. Then also the Atlantic has a COVID tracker that they have direct feeds from all the Department of Healths, and they come in, and basically I just log on every day. Typically anymore now, it's since it's, you know, everybody's got quite a bit of COVID fatigue, I only check. I'll update it maybe once a week, or this, you know, since the last one, it's been about 3 weeks since I did my last update, which I think was on January 29th. So literally I didn't pull any of the data until a couple days ago, but I log it in across the spreadsheet, and you know, it's not rocket science. I put it all there. You can put mathematical formulas into Google spreadsheets just like you can for Excel. So most of the stuff after I put in, I gotta try to accept that. Rachel Sarge, another one of my players. There we go. Is on. Hi, Rach. Uh-oh. I think I screwed up and accidentally closed my window. So let's see if we can get back in here. Whoops. Alright, so I'm not doing friend requests. I'll do it through my phone or something like that, because now I have to come back in here. So I'm going to do a couple different things here. I got to change something in the software quick. All right, there we go. I think I'm back in. I'm wondering if everybody can just pause with me for a second. We'll get back to this. I want to make sure some of my players that are coming in that although this is public, so I should probably wait until later. So that's what I'll do. I'm going to close that out. You can all watch. I'll get your Facebook requests afterwards. Bailey, what's up? Kira, what's going on? Thank you. McKaylee, the barrage of players has started already. Marissa, Cookie. If I give shout outs to all of you guys, we're going to be here all night. But one of the reasons, ladies, that I decided to wing this tonight, besides the fact that if I can do things that are unnerving, so can you, is that I'm hoping that maybe I could use this software somehow within the next 2 weeks and try to get that Meet the Cardinals podcast, and maybe I could Skype these all in one by one, or I can figure out some way to pull these in on Facebook Live, and you could participate, and we could do what I've been promising you for 2 years that I would get done. So, you know, I'll give real quick shout outs because I don't care. This is my podcast, it's my show, and I can get the facts any way that I want to. So we'll go, Bailey is on here. Bailey's a junior, had a rocking game tonight, tons of rebounds, was fantastic, incredibly active, getting everywhere on her feet. Fouled out for the second game in a row, but that doesn't matter because we won, and that makes everything better. So it's all good. Kira is on watching. Kira's our senior, and none of you can see these people, but it's okay. You're going to listen to about them. But awesome girl, awesome player, is getting more confident whether she likes to believe it or not, and is having really good games here at the end of the year, contributing, and every time that she does something that gives her confidence, she plays even better. So you just got to keep on rocking it. McKaylee is the engine, and keeps the team kind of moving. She cranks it, always running around at 100 miles an hour. And another super junior that we have, Rachel's on here, sophomore, who owns the post and is coming along really good. Marissa's on here as our super freshman. Shout out to her real quick, who is trying to figure it all out. It's not easy as a freshman trying to suddenly be thrust onto the varsity stage. I didn't get to play varsity until I was a junior, so it's one of those things. I can't imagine being a young freshman, what it's like to get out there and get minutes. Emma's on here. Emma's still currently sitting out because she got her head slammed off the floor when she was going for a rebound, and hopefully she's back soon. She's been playing really good as a freshman. So, you know, we got a squad, and, you know, tonight I think we moved to 9-10, and you know, it'd be great if we were, you know, one of the big schools like a Thorpe or something like that were just steamrolling other teams. But at the same time, I wouldn't give it up. We got no issues every time I go into practice. For the most part, 99.99% of the time, they're always in a good mood. They're super happy. A lot of personalities, and they're the best. So my team is on here, and I don't know if that makes it more intense or what. So, all right, let's get back to the data. All right, so wherever we left off, I log in the data all here. And if anybody on your screen, if you're watching a laptop or a phone, and I'm scrolling too fast, or I'm going through statistics that don't make any sense, go ahead and make comments. I have this stuff by now. It's almost memorized. It's always lurking in the back of my brain somewhere. So every day I just punch it all in. And you can see I'm buzzing through this pretty quick, and it's on that delay. But I've got 346 days in. And like I said, I pull it in, and then I automate all the rest of the mathematical calculations. So when I'm all done with that, I just scroll through the national data. When I'm all done with that, I move on to Pennsylvania, is all the data below here. It's all matched up day to day. Pennsylvania I get from the Department of Health, and also from that Atlantic website that I spoke about. I can verify everything that way. When I'm all done with that, I have the graphs, and that's usually the only thing that everybody sees. And they're set up pretty easily. You plug in the data. So for example, we have the national growth rate. I can change anything. Anybody watching on TV? That's pretty cool. I didn't even think of that. But, you know, I have data ranges on there, and I don't know if you see the setup mark that just came up. But that's how it is. The graphs pretty much are automated also, so there's not really a whole lot of opportunity for me to manipulate the data or do anything like that. It's all raw data, and I'm also not a scumbag like Andrew Cuomo, so I don't manipulate the data in order to get anything out of this. It is what it is. If the numbers are good, the numbers are good. If the numbers are bad, that's the way it is. But so this is what we normally see. So the national growth rate is a calculation. The graph here shows how fast the virus infections are doubling. So what that means is, for example, if you had 5 infections, say it's the very first 5 COVID infections came out, and say that went to 10 infections after one day, you would say that the virus is doubling every day. So for example, you'd go from 5, following day it'd be 10, following day it'd be 20, following day it'd be 40. So you can see a day after that it'd be 80. So you can see that's called exponential growth. And that's how a virus or a pandemic can get out of hand, is when the doubling rate's very high. If it is a doubling rate of 1, that means it's doubling every day. So obviously the lower it is, the slower it's moving. Now that doesn't necessarily mean, like I said, after a year here we have 28 million or so infections, but at the same time, at least the doubling rate is slow, or this thing would have been at 28 million infections within a couple of weeks. I had a couple of people say to me in the early beginning that this was going to be out of hand at that point, really very early on. And 28 million infections isn't anything to be thrilled about, but at the same time, this could have gone off the rails early. If you're taking a look at where it started in the very beginning, I mean, the growth rate was extremely high. It was doubling, every couple of days. I don't think it ever made it to a doubling rate of 1. I'd have to scroll through the data, but thankfully after the initial surge, things kind of slowed down and have been fairly stable ever since. So the crude way, when I'm doing just the data updates on Facebook, I find out how many days it takes the virus to double, and I'll normally report that then. So it's sometimes 46 days or whatever it is, and I do that quick math, and then the idea is if the days are extending, means it's taking longer and longer for the virus to double, which means the growth rate is lower. And you can kind of map out. We were at one point over 100 days, and I fought off a burp there. That was pretty gross. But anyway, I don't have any fancy math to do that. I literally just scroll all the way down to the bottom, and I take a look at how many infections we're at. And right now we're at, as of the 17th, I didn't do any data today just because I had too much work. So I'll take, for example, you see at the bottom it's 28,115,000 or so. So I'll take that, 906. I got my calculator pulled up here. I divide it by 2, and I can see that around a little over 14 million infection cases would be the doubling of how we got to 28 million now. So I take that 14 million and I scroll up until I find it. And here's the closest one right here on cell 269. So remember that 269, I come back down to the bottom, and my last day of data is 346. So I go ahead and I take 346, and we minus, it's so late, I don't remember, that was 269, yes. Minus 269, and it took 77 days for the virus to double to the current infection count of 28 million. So that's how it is. And that's actually, I don't have my last update. I was going to try to write down all the stats, but it would have taken forever. So I can tell you that's, I'm almost positive an improvement. I pull up another window. Maybe I can, it doesn't matter. So that's how I come to some of the mathematical statistics that you see on on just the worded post that I put up with the graphs. So nothing fancy there. So 77 days for national. If I come here for Pennsylvania, we're at 905, 995, same idea. It's not that wild. So you're looking at about 453,000 infections is the target I'm looking for, which is right here, give or take. It's not always perfect, so that's at 631. So I'll go back down to cell 701. Ladies, have I lost you yet? Did yous all leave? I'm still at 15. Yous are probably listening to music or asleep or something like that, but I forget where I was at. Where was that for 631? Minus 631 is 70 days. And I know that's an improvement too. I think we had gotten all the way down to, we were in the 40-day range or so for when the virus was doubling. And considering we were at 100 days, that was really something that was concerning at the time being while we were in that surge. But for the most part, that has passed. So we'll get back up here to the graphs, and we'll just go graph by graph. Growth rates, we did. Fatality rates. Fatality rate is literally just the mathematical formula of the number of fatalities we're at divided by the number of infections, and that gives you that percentage. And you can see by the graphs here, things have always been trending downward since really, really early. And even though you're going to hear on the news now, and it's not good. There's nothing about this that is ever particularly good, given the fact that we've been locked up for a year, and obviously people have been sick and really sick and lost their lives and things like that. But at the same time, you got to try to find some kind of positive things. So when the virus was really early, right here we are in May, and the rate was all the way up at like 5.96, almost 6% on the national level. And if it would have stayed that way, which is theoretically possible, you can at least think to yourself, oh my gosh, the numbers for fatalities would have been through the roof. But thankfully, we got better at treatments. We got available treatments online. Hospitals obviously have worked really hard to do the best they can. And as if I just come down here through the graph, you can see the steady progression downwards. And I will say that you'll notice here over the last couple weeks, it kind of hit a plateau and has actually gone up a little bit. And this is all just I've always said from the beginning that fatalities are always going to kind of follow behind infections by about 2 weeks. So as numbers are finally coming down, you're going to see kind of those last bit of fatalities come through, and the curve will follow. Same thing for Pennsylvania. It was as high at one point at 8%. This was during the, what I, like it or don't like it, called the nursing home slaughter. And that's really pretty much what it was, where, the decisions made by our Department of Health and some of the other states, local states, was to put COVID positive patients into nursing homes. And I'm not saying that they could see the future or anything like that, but at the same time, we had the Secretary of Health pull her own mother out before things really got bad, and they might not have been fortune tellers, but they knew things were going to be pretty bad. I'm pretty sure they had an idea that nursing homes didn't have the personal protective equipment. They didn't have testing that was available. They had a lot of things that worked against them, and we lost a lot of people, like we do in really bad flu epidemics, but obviously this was at a greater scale. So that was all initial, and Pennsylvania has also done the steady decline ever since, and it also has kind of plateaued, and we're just sitting down here at the bottom. I don't know if these are going to show that we're not ever going to get below this. It's still wintertime and people are still cooped up inside, and I think that contributes to the infections going up, and obviously that if it contributes to infections, it has to also contribute to the fatalities. So it might or might not be something that we get even lower. But once again, if you're trying to find positives, on the national side, you're looking at a current rate of about 1.75%. So 98.25% of people that get sick survive. By the sheer numbers of the infections, obviously it's not good, but at the same time, like I said, 98.25% of people surviving in something that literally, when it came out and we realized how serious it was, scared everybody really bad. It's, I don't know of anywhere where hospitals were truly overrun. So in regards to how has this panned out, I think we're lucky. We're lucky kids, barely get it. And when they do get it, it's not as severe, and that doesn't mean there's not exceptions, but at the same time, we're going along at a decent pace. So next up are the epidemic curves, and if enough of this was shown on the screen, you'll see I have Florida over here, and that's not something I want to talk about yet. But here's some really good news in regards to the the data, the epidemic curve. So how is the epidemic curve any different than the growth rate? They're not the same. Growth rate simply is a mathematical calculation that determines how fast the virus is doubling. The national epidemic curve is simply a consistent logging of how many infections per day there are. And when I have curve written down here, I used to include in the very beginning a sample bell curve, and the bell curve was to display what's known as Farr's law. Farr's law states that whenever you have something like an epidemic or a pandemic, typically you're going to see two things. You're going to see if any time there's a surge, things will typically plateau, and then you know that on the back end it's going to form a bell. That's the whole point of the curve. So the bell curve, you know, after you hit a plateau, you can start to judge when you'll go back down the other side. You'll also be able to tell how quickly things should move on the other side. And as far as COVID goes, it's kind of always followed those principles in a given area. Now nationally, it's a little more complicated than that, because for COVID, we never had it truly across all 50 states until this latest surge that happened when fall came. So if you take a look at the curve here, it actually shows all the mini waves that we had in different parts of the country up until we had the largest surge, which we're all aware of, that we just went through right now. So here in the beginning, you have the time when it went through like the Midwest. So it started, we got hit in New York. You had Washington State over on the West Coast that had it, but it only was in a couple states. Pennsylvania was affected a bit, especially with the nursing homes. So, but the fact that it was only in a part of the states is why this is so low. This is not reflective of this in regards to how bad the epidemic was, because once again, you have to have it in the proper context where you have an idea of how many states this was covered. So when you hear in the news and they had, you know, a lot of interest in saying, well, we've reached more infections per day than we've ever had before, or we've reached more fatalities, and we'll get onto that next, than we've ever had before. It's really important to have the context that doesn't necessarily mean anything if it's not across all 50 states at one time. So yes, you know, when you're looking right here, it looks like things were so much better, but that's only because it only affected a handful of states. When you move into the second surge here, this is when it hit areas such as Florida, some of the southern states that were down across there, Texas and things like that. But once again, it still wasn't widespread across all 50 states. So you can't say that this surge was better or worse than this surge, which was better or worse than this surge, because they were all distinctly different and they all had different populations that they were hitting at one time. So just to take a quick look at the comments, Dennis, absolutely. You know, the nursing homes, I didn't understand. I'm backtracking a little bit because I want to hit that question. Nobody understands how many fatalities there are at nursing homes, probably unless you work there. And it wasn't until I was trying to dive into data months ago to find out. The biggest question I had from the beginning was, well, we know we're losing a lot of nursing home age, you know, people in nursing homes and other care facilities, and we're hearing them on the news now because of COVID. But I have done some work for when I did aquariums, and they would often go into nursing homes for the residents to look at. And to be honest, there was a lot of times where, you know, the residents I would see and get to know a little bit, they weren't there that long. And I began to find out, you know, the average nursing home life expectancy when somebody gets in there is not necessarily calculated in years, but months. So when I dug into the data of how many pass away in nursing homes each year, it's a lot. And it's unfortunately a lot, but, you know, obviously it's care homes for the end of life is essentially what it is. So I have data that won't be really comparable to anything until at least June of this year, because that's when they release. But I'm interested in seeing an answer to the question, and I'm sure some of the nursing home workers that know me and might be on this are going to have a better clue than me for now. But was this something that simply took out our vulnerable people and it was going to, something was going to take them out, and this just hastened it. Is this going to add on to the fatality numbers? I know that I think when I looked up the numbers, approximately 25 to 32,000 or so nursing home residents die just in Pennsylvania every year. So we'll be able to take a look at the new numbers that come out that were over a COVID period specifically, and we'll be able to see how much of an increase COVID was over just these residents passing away from all kinds of different things that they're exposed to. So we'll kind of get there then. Back to the epidemic curve. Sorry for the tangent, but this right here obviously is the latest surge that we were in, and it wasn't necessarily any worse than these smaller surges. It just literally this time occurred across all 50 states, I think, except for Hawaii. So that's the reason why the numbers have been so high. It's not a coincidence that Pennsylvania, which is the graph right here, we had the initial surge, which matches the initial surge that hit the East Coast and Washington. And if you take a look, we had a similar surge that reflects what the rest of the country had, and that goes to corroborate the idea that this was, for whatever reason, going to get into all 50 states at one time, and sure enough it did. The good news is, obviously, I didn't explain it because there was a red trend line up on the fatality growth rates, but down here on the curves, obviously the red line is what's called a trend line. I don't develop that. All I do is tell Google Sheets in the setup that I want a trend line. I want it to show me what direction the numbers are going, and it puts this in for me. So you can clearly see right here the bell curve, both for national and Pennsylvania. And that's the good news. We're down the other side, and you can see once again it almost formed a perfect bell. If you would draw a line right down through here, it's almost congruent on both sides. Same with Pennsylvania, other than obviously a few outliers that push and pull it in a couple directions. So the numbers are going well, and we're not going to get into any discussion of those numbers and why they might be doing better or any of that until I'm all done with the rest of the normal data update. So then we can come down to the fatality curves. So we had fatality, we had national growth rate of the numbers, which once again is doubling time of the amount of infections. We moved on to the epidemic curves, which are infections per day. So we also had the fatality growth rates, and it's the exact same idea. The fatality growth rates was how long it takes the fatalities to double. Here on the fatality curves, we're simply logging and looking at the trends of the amount of fatalities per day. So I hope I explained that well enough for why you have fatalities in both graphs, or you have growth or whatever concept in both graphs, but they're slightly different. So this just logs the fatalities. You have the initial surge, which you can see nationally. You have that second surge, and then obviously we have the large surge now that we just went through. For Pennsylvania, the same thing, as you could see from it matches up with the epidemic curves, both nationally and in Pennsylvania. So that's how you know that fatalities definitely follow the trends of infections there, and they're always a little bit behind. So you can see the steepness of the epidemic curves is slightly different than the steepness of the fatality curves, which only plateaued and are still coming down the other side because they follow 2 to 3 weeks behind. People, obviously have to get sick, then they have to progress from being sick to having to get hospitalized, they progress from being hospitalized to intensive care, to being intubated and possibly have a poor outcome at the end of that. So that explains that. Moving on to national hospital data. And everybody shouldn't be shocked to see that we've got the same triple camel humps going on here of initial surge, second surge, and then this last surge. So same concept we followed on all these others is that the reason why this section right here is so high is because, once again, we're talking about hospitalizations all across the United States instead of just in pockets of the country as it was for these two. Obviously, it's fantastic news that things are trending in a good way. So at the worst, we were somewhere around 130,000, 132,000 people hospitalized across the country. As of the other day, we're down to, it's right around in the mid-60s or so. So that is obviously fantastic news following along with everything else. Pennsylvania hospital data shows the initial surge that was an exact mirror image of the epidemic curves, and hospitalization is following right along with it. So we never, obviously hospitals were full, staff were probably stretched pretty thin, but at the same time we never overwhelmed any of the facilities, and we've been able to do okay, and things are coming down the other side. What you can't see is there's actually a low line down here, which is the amount of people that are on ventilators. And unfortunately, pairing this up with people that were in the hospital didn't work out very well, because the amount of people hospitalized was way higher than the amount of people that were on a ventilator. So this line barely showed up. But at the same time, I can show you the raw numbers. We've gone from, sorry, I had to pause there. And, those numbers have followed down. All right, that was weird. I had an interruption, and then it switched to one of my other OBS screens. Kira, yeah, I saw the text on Remind. That's funny. These are all witty. I'm glad with a day off tomorrow, you decided to hang out here. It's probably thrilling. What's better, playing and beating Pottsville or getting some facts? That's the question. But anyway, Pennsylvania hospital data good. Next, I started developing the trends for Schuylkill County. I've been on an hour already. That flies. But Schuylkill County got, fairly high, just like everything else. I didn't go back all the way to March for Schuylkill County because there's only so much time I'm going to do for some of these things. And the reason why I started doing a graph of Schuylkill County, I used to just plug the numbers and I'd give a number update, and I'd kind of delete old, and then I'd, fill in new and all that. But obviously, as the numbers got worse during this last surge, it became a little bit more, I think, necessary for me to at least provide some contextual thing for people to see. So I logged all the infections from October. And once again, it's just a rolling tally of infections per day. So as I scroll down through, you can see where all the data comes from. And the graph, get back up here, is once again kind of familiar. This would match up with the national and Pennsylvania surges, which started around October. So, we came, we peaked, and we're down the other side also in Schuylkill County. So that's good. There's a lot of places and businesses in Schuylkill County that are closed, and hopefully this trend continues and it's something where we can soon open up. So that is the data updates. If any of it's helpful to actually see the numbers, here, for example, is Pennsylvania, and we'll just pick, we go back to January, things were pretty high. That's not Pennsylvania, that's national. I thought the infections per day were crazy. This is what you get. But, so if we're going to Pennsylvania, and we're looking at the infections per day, this is more like it. So we go back to January, and numbers were pretty high at like 10,000 per day, and you can just see, all you got to do is follow this column. And if you don't believe my graphs that somehow I'm messing around with them or something like that, you can just look at the data for yourself. Anybody wants to go ahead and and check out the daily data and say that I've got anything different in there. I think we can kind of settle that I'm already insane enough to be doing this for almost a year, so the idea that I change around the data is pretty stupid, but you know, who knows if people would say something like that. So anyway, this here's the column for fatalities, so you can also see that that's been trending downward, which is good. Over here we have the amount of people that are hospitalized in Pennsylvania. You can see that trending downward, and this column here shows how many less we have per day. So they're almost all negatives. Here you had one here that was kind of an outlier, 9 increase there, but other than that it's almost all negatives. Right here was the ventilators for Pennsylvania, and also the change per day in ventilators. So that's all straight data right there. If we come up to national, here's where it was. So we had, you know, at the worst 307,000 back on January 8th. And if you're looking at the data here, we're trending downward. Nothing really to hide there. These are the fatalities. Nothing to hide there. It's all trending downwards. These are the amount of people hospitalized here, trending downwards. Also here you have the number of fatalities, or no, these are the number of ICU. Getting squirrely a little bit. So all that trending downwards. So, you know, it is what it is. It's a long time. We're in this hall for a long time, but at the same time, you know, we've got things to be positive about, things to watch, things to be careful about. So the numbers are trending downward now, and I figured I would maybe just take this in a different direction now and prove a couple points. And anybody that knows me should know I'm not particularly political. I follow politics, but at the same time, I lean over onto the conservative side for a lot of things. At the same time, probably, you know, fiscally, socially, I'm a bit more liberal on a lot of things. But, you know, none of my numbers here or the points I'm going to point out have anything to do with anybody on any side of the political aisle. As far as I'm concerned, you know, COVID is a human problem, and specifically if we're looking at numbers within our country, you know, it's difficult. But at the same time, my issue from the very beginning has been, number one, the news media, who have just talked, you know, stupidity forever, trying to make this as horrible as it can be, so everybody's locked in on their TVs or web pages or whatever it may be, and following along with the train wreck. And, you know, obviously both sides of the political aisle are going to try to take any of the data and twist it and pull it on to their side in regards to, you know, how well are they doing, or is the other side not doing well, and why. So the graphs, and you should be able to see all three across here. I'm going to stick to the majority of my points here about Pennsylvania because that's where I live. We're down to 7 people. We lost half. I wonder if we lost all the team. Anyway, sticking with PA because, as I said, that's where I live, and that's probably where most of the viewers, the people that are going to see it live now or see the recorded copy. And my focus is on accountability, and I don't think we have any of that in Pennsylvania. So what I'm going to show you here is just to try to illustrate things that annoy me that I see in the numbers that nobody's asking questions about. I've had a lot of posts from the very beginning that have showed manipulations of data. You know, we for a while scrambled all the age demographics so that it'd be very hard to read. And at the same time, you know, everybody keeps saying follow the science, and that's become one of my most hated lines that exists out there because we haven't followed the science, we haven't followed the data, and I'm going to focus on Pennsylvania because we're one of the worst here. So originally my idea, I have a list and I'm going to actually cross some things off, is what I was going to do was pull up other web pages and show you quotes that were coming out from Pennsylvania. I don't think I'm going to do that because I'm not totally comfortable with if I change windows here, is it going to completely change the feed? I don't want to have to go back to the software and kind of goof things up. So let's just try to go steady. And you're just going to have to trust me on some of these things. But so, for example, Pennsylvania has had some of the most intense lockdowns of anywhere in the country. I call them the horsemen. We basically have a coalition within our decision makers who Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, I think it might be Delaware, but they aren't heard of from as much, but who've gotten together and decided, what are we going to do in regards to lockdowns and things like that. And what annoyed me, which kind of almost prompted all this, was it's now been a bunch of weeks. It was after we came out of the lockdown in Pennsylvania on January 4th, was the fact that Governor Wolf said that the mitigation efforts are working. You can challenge me on that. I'll find you the quote if you really want to push me on it. But I wanted to show in the graphs here the fact that everything we've done in Pennsylvania from the very beginning has had almost no effect. And that doesn't mean that we didn't try some things, but at the same time, what I've learned from seeing the data every day with COVID and seeing what's been done and where it's been done and all the theories that have been put out there, first it was the weather. The weather outside was the key. And then for some reason, though, this surge happened across all 50 states. And you have completely different climates from the East Coast to the West Coast. California is on fire. The East Coast, Pennsylvania, was on fire. You can go south. Florida spent some time being on fire. You can go all the way back up north, and Washington was on fire again. The Dakotas, different areas like this. Everybody seems to have gone through surges that they can't explain. And it was actually, I keep that to myself a lot, but I listened to a pretty good podcast with Dr. I'm going to freeze up here because it's 12:34. Osterholm from CIDRAP. He's the director for CIDRAP, which is the University of Minnesota Center for Infectious Disease. I listened to a pretty cool podcast. He's now on the Biden transition team, by the way. He's not transition team, but on the pandemic team or whatever, giving some sort of him and Fauci. He's joined Fauci in giving advice and things like that. And it was refreshing. I've listened to him on and off from the beginning because he's always had the nerve to say, I don't have any idea. And I think that's what we've been lacking here forever, is the fact that we don't have politicians or spokespeople that are willing to say, you know what, we don't have a clue why the numbers seem to shift like they do. He has the nerve. He said it very early on with masks. He said, masks are great. People should wear them. At the same time, we should not be telling people that they're going to drive the pandemic into the ground. And the data has proven that that's never been the case. The impact is somewhere in the land of unknown. Nobody knows. So we move on, and this was just a podcast from the February 10th. And he at least had the nerve, the fortitude, I should say, to say, I don't know why the numbers surged the way they did, and we don't necessarily know why they came down. And if nothing can explain this any better, is here we have the national curve. And once again, I'll say that this hump and this hump are two different regions of the country. And then this last hump is obviously the surge we all had. If you look at Pennsylvania, we have this initial surge. We were spared the second surge because it was in a different area of the country, but we were just as involved with all of our lockdown measures in the main surge that occurred over the last couple months. And I pulled Florida specifically because usually if you talk of renegade states or whatever you want to call them that haven't had a whole lot of mitigation efforts, you have Texas and Florida. And to be honest, I was going to add Texas today and I just ran out of time. But I don't have any reason to believe it's going to be any different. They were involved in the second surge, which corresponds over here with the national numbers for the second surge. And they experienced the recent surge, just like all the rest of the states. Pennsylvania, the harshest lockdowns, heavy mask recommendations, and then you have Florida. And, it's important to point out that, the thresholds on the graphs are a little different. You can see here Pennsylvania tops out at 15,000 infections per day. Florida is at 30,000 infections per day. But the curves, the bell curves of the waves themselves are nearly identical. And I don't know what else I could say to show, to explain or prove that we don't really have control over this. And I don't necessarily know if that means, because I know Florida left it up to some of the municipalities and areas to put in mitigation efforts. I know some of them did. But at the same time, for the most part, look at the Super Bowl was just down there. They had 25,000 people packed in the stands. There's something going on here. This virus is running a course, and this is a term I got from Dr. Osterholm from the very beginning, and he calls it a fire burning, and wherever there's available wood, if the virus gets close to it and has enough to light it, it burns through the entire thing. And I think that's absolutely true. I don't think there's a whole lot we could do. And this goes to, once again, having honest conversations over did and does Pennsylvania have to go through these crazy, I'm calling them crazy, but through these intense mitigation efforts when they haven't had as huge of an impact. How many businesses have gone under in Pennsylvania because they couldn't open? Kids aren't in school, even though by now we know that kids aren't the major index cases of transmission. I'm sorry, but if you do any kind of Google search for grades during the pandemic, you'll find that virtual learning has failed across the country. We've taken essentially a year away from people, and it hasn't, it's not an area that's overwhelmed anyway. If you look at updates from schools, you'll have a case and they'll shut down. It's never gotten to the point where a whole section of the school was burning with infections. And because I think it's important that we honestly say we're not really sure how things are going and what they're doing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think people got to get a grip and come to the realization it's okay to have a shred of honesty and to say we're not exactly sure what's going to happen without worrying that people are going to lose their minds and freak out. So here's the data, and this is what it shows. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to show in the data before I do actually leave my raw data pages here. So I don't think so. So before I move on, I'm going to give literally about a minute here in case anybody wants to ask me any questions on the actual raw data itself. In fact, I'm going to skip off in front of the camera here for a second and grab a drink because I'm going to die. Not literally. But I haven't got much to eat today because I was on the run, and I certainly haven't hydrated much. But I came home and I ate a lot of carbs, and anybody that knows me knows that's painful to say. Actually, not a lot. I had some pasta with some meatballs, and then maybe a couple of cookie bars and maybe a little something else. But guys got to do what a guy's got to do for food, and I was worried about getting this set up. So I'm just trying not to have dead air while I see if any questions come in. Let me grab a drink. Is there anybody that's a nerd like me and thinks that any of that was too hard to follow or too fast to follow? Or, if anybody who has followed my updates, obviously let me know on here if you think this is a little bit better. I have greater interest with the software here to be able to do live streams on different platforms, different maybe Facebook groups, and to be able to take better questions and show data on the screen. And that's what I really like about what I'm using and starting tonight is having the ability to do more than just see me on a camera and taking questions and trying to work my way through that. I think, going through pictures and data and stuff like that is pretty important. There's only 6 people left. The next one I'll do at a better time slot. After we make our run through districts and handle everything there, we'll I'll have a little bit more free time, and we'll see what's going on here. And I don't necessarily want it to be all about COVID either. I've got the Get the Facts podcast that I flirt around with every now and then, and has never really gotten to a whole lot of shows, but hopes and dreams. Thanks, Marcy. Trying to break it down as easy as possible. So I'm going to move on to my next topic, and for this, you're going to have to kind of buckle up, because in a perfect world, I was going to have multiple windows open and I was going to just switch from window to window. Instead, we're going to have to kind of take a ride, and I decided to drink some beer, and I'm going to be carbonated. I don't want to burp because I never drink beer anymore, and I'm going to have to work through those phases, so that should be just awesome. All right, so we're going to move on now to more Pennsylvania things. I don't know if I said it when I was talking about my annoyance with the lack of accountability in Pennsylvania, but one of the worst things are the briefings, the daily. I'm not sure if they're even daily anymore because I can't watch them. It used to be, the governor or Dr. Levine would be on, and through most of the pandemic, reporters weren't even allowed in there. Questions were sent in, and they asked the ones they wanted to, and when they ran out of time, it was over. But there's never been any hard questions anyway. It's always been, that's how you handled having to take care of things without being on camera. But anyway, the questions were always softballs, and they were always stupid. So recently they started to allow reporters back in. Nobody asked any questions. But then again, I realized that nobody's probably bothered to take down all of the data and have anything to reference. Or they don't look at it, or they're working on other stories or whatever. But nobody's paying attention to any of it. And like I said, it's all right there. It's all been there from the very beginning. So we're going to move on to Governor Wolf monitoring. I'm just going to pause for a minute. Actually, I can see it's already going to come over. Okay. So what we've got here is the Pennsylvania COVID early warning monitoring dashboard updates. Okay. And what this is the contact tracing database of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to keep this pretty short and sweet because I'm just looking to make a point. And we're going to, I gotta see how I'm gonna do, I forget what I use here a little bit, contact tracing. Actually, I'm gonna scroll down. It might have all the archives. This is gonna really suck if I cannot remember where in the world all the archives are. Like I said, it's been a couple weeks since I had all this ready. Okay, cool. So we're into it now. So what you're seeing now is historical database of contact tracing, and it goes typically by a week. So the point here is not to look at anything recent, but I'm going to make a point about the most recent lockdown that we had in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to back up and I'm going to remind you once again that Governor Wolf said the mitigation efforts are working. We're doing better. So we're going to start here. And then I am going to go back to Google Sheets for a minute because I realized I didn't show you something that I wanted to. But we're going to go back the the lockdown for us, the most recent one, started about December 12th, if I'm not mistaken, and ended on January 4th. So this contact tracing data, what you're going to see is the complete state tallies for what they are supposedly basing their mitigation efforts on. Is that true? I have no idea. I don't see, they don't ever release anything saying that they have additional data, and if so, it should be on this stinking website so that the public can see it. So I'm taking it at their word that this is the data they look at. So when you come in and you're looking at a week, so here's December 4th to December 10th. My point for this is the last section of dates that Governor Wolf would have looked at along with Secretary Levine and everybody else in the Department of Health in order to determine, do we need to lock down really hard Pennsylvania again? So we'll come down, and it is always, during the lockdown, it was no gyms, no salons, no restaurants, takeout only, etc., etc. So let's take a look at where the numbers were at then. So the important thing to come down to is right here at business visits. And they provide the data pretty clearly, but it's a little complicated to try to understand what they're getting at. So from December 4th to December 10th, there were 62,693 confirmed cases in Pennsylvania. And it goes back from the week before. So of those 62,693, they attempted to do contact tracing, which is where they call because they want to ask questions. So if we look at this, calls were made, only 4.4% or 2,746 people actually provided an answer. So that means they couldn't reach people, or that means they simply don't have enough contact tracers, whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as this remains consistent, you can apply it to any other week that you want, because the numbers should always trend similarly. So whether it be this week or next week, if you have the same pool of about 2,746 respondents, you're going to be in the ballpark. So of those 2,746 people that answered, only 0.4% or 252 answered, yes, we visited a business establishment. Now, I don't care if you believe the answers or not. Once again, we're looking for consistency with the answers because it's not the same people. So when I show you the next page, if it's similar, different people answered the question. So whether people are lying or not lying or whatever, it doesn't really matter. So only a fraction of the 62,000, only a fraction of the 2,746 actually said they were in a business. And then that's broken down to what kind of businesses. We have restaurants, we have gyms, bars, they were also shut down, I forgot to mention that, salon, barber shops, and then some other kind of business. So Governor Wolf and the rest of the crew looked at this and said, this is not good. This is terrible. We're going to shut down these businesses. Now let's ignore for a second the fact that this only 252 people said that they were even in a business. So that means all the other respondents they reached said, no, we weren't in a business. And like I said, truth or not, doesn't matter. So we go from here, 252, 2746, follow along, memorize in your head. We're going to get out of that, and we're going to go to this is when it's reported. So this would have been the last report, December 25th to December 31st, would have been the last data they looked at in regards to should we open up or not. So actually, is it this one or is it this one? Because this is the, here we are. So we're going to go down. Actually, I want to be on the other one. Don't mind me. So we want to go down here to business visits, and we're in the exact same thing. So total number of cases, almost the same. We're at 54,000 instead of 60,000. Okay, so that didn't change a whole lot. Now we look at the amount of people that responded. The other one we were at 2,746. For this one, we're only a little bit lower at 2,357. And when we come down here, instead of 252 who said they were in a business, we're not a whole lot different. It was 0.4%, and here it's 0.3% said yes, they were in a business establishment. And here our numbers are almost all the same as they were before. So somebody could bother explaining to me why, if this contact tracing barely changed, why are we bragging that mitigation efforts have worked? If we're only 0.1% different in the amount of people that attended a business, what are we even doing closing the businesses down to begin with? And I can't come up with a rational answer for that other than assuming that nobody's going to look at the data. But if we remember, 252 people was enough to cause a hard close. So I'm hoping I can find the one I'm looking for, and that's coming back into the very reaches of data from when they first started doing this. We're going back November, October. And I'm looking for August. All right, so here's where it all starts. We've got September 8th. Here's August 31st. I'm going to see if I can go back just a little bit further. Marissa, I don't sleep. I'm a robot. And I don't have to recover from a game. So I'm good. There's things to be done. Okay, we can go back to August 14th. This is the first time that contact tracing data was released to the public. So, and I agree with you, Marcy. Like I said, the answer is nobody could keep lying that much to have the data be consistent. That's not possible. So, here we go to the earliest contact tracing we had in August when numbers were really pretty good. I can prove that numbers were pretty good because it wasn't just from a week. This was from almost a month that we only had 24,468 cases, as opposed to 60,000 and 53,000 over just a week. So we're in a far better case here. We're in far better shape. Things were not open they haven't been open all the way, but they were at least open more, and there was no consistent threat of closing it down. And this is an area that gets a little bit murkier because, once again, Pennsylvania decided to change the way they do math halfway through the data that they were representing. Earlier it was demographics for COVID infections. No, Marissa, I simply like the flavor. But they changed it for demographics. They had real spread out demographics and kept everything 65 and older a lot squirrely with a bunch of levels. Then they brought it all together to try to, keep you chasing your tail the entire time. So here was the same idea. So we go back to these 24,000, I'm going to call it 25,000 cases. And you have 13% or 1,499 answered yes, they visited a business establishment prior to the onset of symptoms. Now I want you to think for a minute. You might pull that 2,746 number. You might pull that 2,300 whatever number in your head. That's not what we're talking about here. The number that I just gave, 1,499, is not the amount of people that answered the question. That is the percentage of people that said yes, they visited a business establishment. And I'm going to remind you that when we had 60,000 and 53,000 cases, it was at 0.3% and 0.4%. I don't think I screwed that up at all. But we were talking about 252 or 136, whatever it was. That I can't remember. 252 versus 1,499. And if you divide that by 4 weeks, $1,499 divided by the 4 weeks, you get 375. So the data points I showed you were per week at 252. The other one was 130, whatever. And when we were nearly fully open and the world was good and coronavirus wasn't as big of a deal, we had 375 yes answers that they were in a business establishment. And yet, when it dropped from 375 recently to 252 and 130, whatever it was, we decided we had to completely lock down restaurants, bars, gyms, and salons in order to get a handle on it. And yet, at the same time, it didn't change our curve shape from Florida. It didn't change it from the national curves, which had Texas in it, who has not been doing a whole lot of mitigation efforts. So once again, Pennsylvania, who's really following the science? And I kind of wish that I wouldn't have brought that in at an hour and 40 minutes into this episode, but you know, it's the facts, get them. So that's as far as I wanted to go on that. We're going to move ahead on one area, and we're going to save that for another episode, but I am going to go back to Sheets because I did want to show you something else. Sheets. Glad it doesn't bring up Sheets, the restaurant, but anyway. We'll go back into my data. Now, this revolves around the same idea of Governor Wolf saying that mitigation efforts are working. So I gotta let this load for a second, get all the graphs and everything loaded in. But we're gonna go down to Pennsylvania. We already know from the bell curves that they look the same, but for the sake of argument, and we're down to 5 people. I exhausted the world, Facebook world, anyway. So we're gonna come down and we're gonna look at what caused the surge in Pennsylvania, or at least what does the data trend with. Marissa, for the record, this was not an energy drink. But, all right, let's get into it. So, we're sitting here in November, and the surge is picking up. We can see it going from 2,000, creeping up to 6,000. I'm going to go on the record as saying I don't think anybody's really sure how the fire came into the kindling, so to speak, the wood that COVID likes to burn no matter what. Now, I do believe speculation, even back in like November 5th, people probably start traveling for Thanksgiving by then. So let's just try to see what happened with Thanksgiving. So here we are at the 14th, and you can follow along, just try to bracket with the numbers here. Once again, this column is the infections per day, and we can see this increasing, and right here is Thanksgiving. Now obviously the peak would not be on Thanksgiving because people have to come home, they have to get the virus, they have to start to get sick, they have to then go for tests. So you would not expect the peak to be on Thanksgiving itself. But if we just move down a couple rows, where is the peak? The peak is on December 5th, which we can calculate 626 to 618 is approximately 8 days after Thanksgiving. We have the peak in the numbers. And then things start to trend down for a little bit. So keep that in your head. 8 days after Thanksgiving, the numbers peaked and we started to go back down. Now, the issue with this was we didn't just have one holiday. We actually had two holidays, obviously back to back. So you have Christmas come rolling right in. So the numbers go down, but then right away they start to ramp back up, because if you remember, November 5th, numbers were creeping up, and it wasn't quite Thanksgiving yet. And sure enough, on the 8th, numbers are creeping back up across Pennsylvania, and they continue to come up. And here's Christmas. And once again, the peak is never right on Christmas. It's always a bit after. So you come down here a little farther, and we reach back up into the 9 and 10,000 area, which is 1-1. We had a peak, and that's approximately 7 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days after Christmas. And now, after that, you magically see, after Christmas has passed and all the different traveling for New Year's is another date, third holiday thrown in. So you have numbers come down a little bit here, and then you have New Year's. And 8 days or so afterwards, you have another peak. Peak is right here. Not magic. And then the numbers start to trend downward, and they've been trending downward ever since. So Governor Wolf says our mitigation efforts were working. The curves don't say that. The curves show that we're exactly the same as everybody else. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can see similar trends up here. So now I'm up into the national data, and we'll try to find our way to Thanksgiving area. Now, if you remember, it started around the 5th or so, numbers started trending upwards. And sure enough, you can see on 11/6, really on 11/4, numbers start coming above 100,000 for the first time ever. If you follow me along all the way up through here, numbers were never up at 100,000. They were always below. So now we're following along, creeping upwards, upwards, upwards. And sure enough, Thanksgiving is here, and we're going to look ahead and see when we have some kind of peak. 12/4, we hit a pretty good peak of 238,000 infections in one day. And where is that compared to Thanksgiving? Lo and behold, 7 days after Thanksgiving, we have a peak. Then remember, December 5th is here. Numbers probably are going to come down and start climbing again, because people are starting to travel from Christmas. Thanksgiving travel's over. Christmas travel starts. And look again, the numbers start creeping up. We hit a 250 right here, a 255. So let's get our way to Christmas. Here's the Christmas holiday. Now we got to look for the surge after it, because of everybody coming together, going back home, and having the infections start to actually take a grip. And sure enough, we can see, we'll go 8 days later, right here at 300, we once again hit a peak right between 6 and 8 days. 240,000 infections, 236 infections, 1,000 infections. Exact same kind of peak, and it's in the exact same time frame. And then look at that, numbers come down for a couple of days, but now we're hitting the backtrack of New Year's. So once again, we'll have New Year's here on the 1st. We're looking for, is there a peak somewhere around 6, 7, 8, 9 days afterwards? And lo and behold, there's a peak on January 8th, 307,911. And then sure enough, after that ends, we start to extend magically. I got a little shift in the force here. There we are. We're back. Magically, the numbers start to trend down. You can follow me along here as numbers continue to trend down, just like Pennsylvania. So what I would like to see is a reporter say, why on earth do we have all these lockdowns when it hasn't deviated anything from the national numbers whatsoever? Why are we part of this tribe of governors that have decided that they need to have, the people under lock and key in order to improve numbers, when that doesn't have any impact on numbers whatsoever? And I could go ahead and run graphs on all these different mitigation efforts. I've done it before, though, on the masks, on the lockdowns and everything else, and they just don't do a whole lot, because there's something at play here that spreads the virus. And obviously we can see one thing from this is that people gathering together is not a good idea. That's the one thing you can learn from here, because it's going to spread. But clearly it doesn't matter at all if you're in a state where everybody's wearing a mask and you're getting together. And you can talk all you want about when people are at these gatherings, they're not wearing masks. If they were wearing masks, it would be a totally different story. But I can map California, where people are masking everywhere. I can map Pennsylvania. I can map it against, I mapped it against Florida. And it doesn't have that big of an impact, because this virus is going to do what it's going to do. It's going to find people that are susceptible. It's going to make them sick. The people that are able to be well are going to get better, and the people that aren't well are going to get really sick and go in the hospital. And the more you gather, the more numbers those are going to be high. But lockdowns of restaurants and bars where people aren't going anyway doesn't work. It's not working, because that's not where people are. I mean, if you go back to the contact tracing numbers, only 0.3 and 0.4% said they were in a business. Back when the numbers were great, 375 people a week were admitting that they were in a business. And now when the numbers are super high, that's when the numbers were low. Now that the numbers have been super high and surged, in the middle of the surge, we're only at 252 people. You can't manipulate and lie about those numbers. It's just not possible. So that's the facts. And it's my corny catchphrase to get the facts. But at the same time, like I said, maybe at the least, this is some sort of permanent record that I've created. And, it's not going to be famous in history. But at the same time, if anybody wants to come back, at least I know what's going on and what's not going on. And I have a rational perspective. And what I've learned from all of this is it doesn't make any sense to shame people. It doesn't make any sense to put people down for what they're doing, other than advising, don't get together in groups unless you all, have agreed that you're probably going to get COVID. And if you're worried about the fact that it's going to make somebody really sick that may not be able to get better. And I understand why plenty of people have said, for my mental health and everything, to screw it and get together and see people, because this is hard. It's hard, and it's draining and everything else. And I tell you, the most draining thing is sitting here and trying to follow reasonable protocol so that I'm not part of the problem. But I have no reason why I shouldn't be allowed to go to the gym. The numbers show that there really isn't any reason why I shouldn't be able to go to a restaurant. There's no reason at all why I shouldn't be able to go to a bar, because they're not the center of all this. And I had another screenshot I was going to show, and this was from one of Scumbag Cuomo's own press briefings that he was nominated for an Emmy for his theatrical press briefings. And clearly nobody bothered to pay attention to the fact that he admitted on there that 70% of infections were occurring right in a house. It's my speculation, it's my theory, but I believe most of the infections in Pennsylvania and across the United States happen because people are simply at work and they bring it home and it spreads within their house to all their different family members. And probably the last people it gets spread to are kids. And kids come into school and they don't spread it to that many other people, maybe a couple, but it's already been raging through families at that point. So the idea that we can't have school open, is a bunch of nonsense. And now, Biden becomes president and suddenly it's a return to school in 100 days. Well, we could have probably been in school 100 days ago, and kids wouldn't be failing at home from this virtual learning, which is impossible for teachers and students to accomplish because there's no accountability. It's tough to, make sure the kids are doing the work, and it's really hard for, to have teachers suddenly get onto this technology where they really can't reach students to begin with. At least not in a way that they're used to, and which is really practical and helpful, because we see that with the grades. And like I said, it's this whole idea of this nonsense that I constantly see of follow the science. We abandoned that. I started this in March of last year for the reason that we abandoned it all the way back then, and we never followed it. And I'm disappointed in the government and Dr. Fauci and Secretary Levine and Governor Wolf and scumbag Cuomo and all the other people that have pitched this into something that it's not. So, we can hit that right away while we're here too, because we're on the national numbers. Anybody that says numbers are suddenly going down because the Trump is no longer president, and like I said, this is not going to be a political episode. It has nothing to do with who I view as a good or bad president. Facts are the facts. And if we have Inauguration Day right here on January 20th, you can already see we had peaked at 307 12 days before. Numbers were already trending downward. And what's kind of cool is at any time, if you're in Google Sheets or even Excel, any other kind of spreadsheet, you can highlight some of the cells, and you can see if I don't think yes, down here in the corner. If you follow my cursor down here, it'll give you different things. You can have the sum, you can have averages, you can do whatever you want to follow the math. So, if you just click on average, you can see from, let's go back, you've got an average of 207 trending downward over a span of, getting hard to think, 8 days. So if I go 8 days before that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, average was 243,755. So things were already trending downward, way before any kind of transition happened. And then I can come, to Inauguration Day and go after it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Even if it, 8, you're down to 166, and this is trending, downward. Nobody interrupted it. Nobody changed it. Nobody changed the flow of it. This is the fact that across all 50 states at this current time, with the strains of COVID, COVID's the disease. The strains of SARS, CoV-2 are burned through the available wood, and they're naturally coming on their way down. And it only gets enhanced when people come together, but at the same time it finds you, and it will infect those that can be sick. And then if you're looking at the last 7 or 8 days, you're all the way down to an average of 74,000 a day, 82,000 if you go back a little bit further. So no interventions necessary. So we could probably put that to bed. But I'd really like if I'd see all my, hard-leaning right friends, or even just public people that follow any of my data, and all the far left-leaning people, to come together on this one issue and say, tell us the stinking truth. And I use stinking, and I don't want to, but I try to be professional on here. I got far harsher words that I would use and be like, let's do this, and let's be honest to people, and let's make sense out of this, and let's just figure out how we're going to care for people, and what we're going to do to protect the most amount of people we can, and decide, that obviously killing people's businesses so that they never recover financially, and we ruin a generation or more over data that is the complete opposite of follow the science. Why don't we all come together and figure out that that's the way that this needs to go, and do something about it, and get rid of these pieces of garbage in government that try to hide it and manipulate it and move it on. I posted earlier today about even just the whole idea of the nursing home slaughter in Pennsylvania that came at the hands, of the nursing home slaughter in New York and New Jersey. And Secretary Levine gets to move her own mom out of a care facility right as this is going down. And so many families that couldn't do that, or who, elderly people are in nursing homes without families that even care about them, and they're sacrificed. And then the numbers are hidden, and numbers are lowered and not reported because are they in a hospital or are they not in a hospital when they die, is about as disgusting as it gets. And that made it in the news for a couple of weeks and then disappeared. And then these weak reporters are busy back throwing softballs again, and people are getting promotions into administrations and things like that when we've ranked the entire time almost the bottom third of testing, which anybody can go to the Worldometer site, Worldometer, and look at the data for Pennsylvania, and then all you do is slide to the right. I wonder if we should, let's not get into that now. But there's different tables in their data that you can click on, and you can see like tests per million of population. You'll find Pennsylvania near the bottom. I made a post today about vaccine data, and I'm not going to pull that up. You'll have to look at my other Facebook post in order to get the link for that. I just don't have time. And you'll see that, a couple of weeks ago we were ranked 44th, and now we're ranked 42nd, and nobody's talking about it. And, there's no pressure, there's no hearings, there's no, I follow a bunch of different senators and representatives on Twitter, and, it's the same old nonsense. You'll see the right trying to attack the left, you'll see the left trying to attack the right, and somewhere in between is everybody getting screwed over. And you can't get the other side to even give a crap unless there's an incentive politically to make something happen. And that's the frustrating thing. I directly tweeted a senator from Pennsylvania today and asked, why in the world is there not a single investigation if scumbag Cuomo, is under investigation in New York? How is there not a concurrent investigation happening in Pennsylvania? I didn't get a reply. And, when I've tried to have discussions in which I'm not confrontational on other topics, I get a reply. And that's because they won't touch it. And, there's only really one way to conquer that, and that is for people to come together on a common issue like this and understand everything else is separated. Like I said, there's a lot of ideals that I'm going to end up on the conservative side that people are going to have to try to debate me really hard to get me to even consider the other side. But for something like this, for data that's completely black and white, that anybody, like I said, I am just some guy who said, I'm going to look at the data because it doesn't make any sense. And I started to log it, and it started to show me trends. And it didn't match what was being talked about on television. And, I decided to keep it going. And, there's no magic here. There's no interpretation that needs to be done besides looking at the data. So you all have looked at it with me tonight, and you can't hide it. So, when are answers finally going to come out? Is it going to take 5 years after this is over, and then some report's going to come out, like some of the dumb wars we've been in, where we realize then that stuff really wasn't true? Is that what COVID's going to be like? Is it going to be, 2026, and a report's going to come out and show that, we lied about the data and we really didn't have any clue how this was supposed to be treated, and, we failed in all kinds of areas. Vaccines, something we're failing in right now. And, to give you the data on that, and you're going to have to trust me a little bit here too, because I don't have time to bring it up. I'm already over 2 hours. Pretty sweet. So, the data shows that 80% of people with COVID that had the worst outcomes, including fatalities, is the age group 65 and over. And yet, if you look at in that podcast I had of Dr. Osterholm from February 10th, he gave the rundown of the data. And as of that time, even though 80% of the worst outcomes were in that age group. To that point, they had only received 50% of the first dose of the vaccinations. And I don't understand that whatsoever. And there's no discussion about that. There's no discussion of, and I'm not confronting the idea that frontline workers have to get the vaccinations. Obviously, it's helpful. On the backside of that, though, if we take the population that's most susceptible to landing in the hospital and having the worst outcomes, probably less is coming into the hospital to begin with. But that's a complicated data issue there of seeing how well, how much that would really be true. But at the very least, there's also a warning coming out right now about new strains of the virus. And if nobody's heard about that, there's at least 3 strains floating around that are more contagious than what we've seen in the United States right now. And I think the biggest one that they're worried about is I think it's B117 strain out of Europe that has landed in the United States. And here we are with the fact that there may be another surge. So I'll call it out early. If another surge happens, I would bet it's going to be the new strain, the B117 strain. And we've had this time. There's 54 million people in the United States that are 65 years old and over. And we do approximately right now 1.7 million vaccinations per day. And, they expect the forecast that this new strain surge is going to happen sometime probably at the end of March, heading into April. And if you count the amount of days and the amount of vaccines that we do per day at 1.7 million, we could have actually given at least one dose to the entire population of those 65 years old and over that make up 80% of the worst outcomes and fatalities from COVID. And we've chosen not to do that. And I know I've just said to give one shot, but according to the sources that I'm coming across, including CIDRAP again, that one dose would get valid and reasonable protection for most people into late spring, to when we could catch up and give the second dose and still have no repercussion from receiving that second dose. So that's some of the data I got to look at more, but options are out there, but we're not even doing that, and I don't necessarily blame anybody that can get up in the line because people are scared and they're afraid of getting sick, and they might have a condition that they think is going to make it worse. And, at the same time, there's people that are able to jump ahead in the line and, really don't have a significant issue, but they count for different reasons. And, we're blockading the people that really need it. And worse than that, Pennsylvania, once again, can't get their shit together and get the vaccines distributed to the places that are going to administer them. And here we sit in 42nd place, almost useless and almost at the bottom of efficiency. And that's what Pennsylvania always seems to bring to the table. We suck at pretty much anything that requires government intervention. We suck at roads, so we have super high gas taxes. And if that's not good enough, we're thinking about putting a toll on Interstate 78 outside of Lenhartsville at the Lenhartsville Bridge, because we need more money. And we need more money even though we have the highest taxes, because our roads suck, because somehow the money never makes it to the roads. So here we have a pandemic, and we've got this, follow the science horseman who's following New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, and has locked us down, and clearly has never bothered to acknowledge the data, because, for all I know, he can't even make the decision himself, that he just follows what New York and other ones do, because they said they'd band together and absorb all the liability. So we suck at following the data. We suck at doing vaccines, and here we are. Pennsylvania, as a government, completely sucks. We can roll it back even further. Casino revenue was supposed to help lower property taxes. That never worked because we suck. We attempted to shift property taxes over to sales tax and income tax and save, boost the economy and save a whole bunch of property owners and renters and everybody else. This was vetted, a billion times, and it sucked. We couldn't accomplish that. Yet magically, we have a proposal from the governor to have the highest income tax raise in history to pay for schools and things like that we could have paid for in other ways before that were vetted, and we just didn't do it. Why? Because we suck. Because we're really not interested in being efficient or good for the people in Pennsylvania. We're just really concerned about the really good living and earning that people make in government in Pennsylvania, running off of the tax money. So there's my rant on that. The last section that I'm going to go on is going to be herd immunity. So I had a website I wanted to bring up, which is a familiar theme here, which was going to show that 2 studies show that antibodies from an infection likely last anywhere from 3 and probably up to 4 months. If you Google 2 studies that show antibodies last for 3 to 4 months, you'll probably come across exactly what I'm talking about. And if you want, you can comment. Strawberry watermelon ice right now, Kira, would be fantastic. Cherry limeade, very good. It would go well right now. That's not a joke. But 2 hours, 10 minutes strong. This is longer than a basketball game. I'm still in it. I'm still fighting, which means you ladies can fight every game. And that if you do, the nerves I had when I started here of not being prepared, not being ready, and wondering if this was going to be an absolute disaster have now turned into me talking forever, which is what I like to do. And I annoy all of you and everybody else with the fact that I don't shut up. Now feels like I'm at home. So there's the lesson in this, that if you push through what is uncomfortable, it becomes comfortable. And when it becomes comfortable, you can succeed and excel and at least have a good time. Because maybe I'm not accomplishing those last 2 things, but I sure as hell am having a decent time, good time at 1:30 in the morning. So what was I talking about? Crap. I honestly don't remember. Anyway. But then there are T cells and B cells, Marcy. You can expand on your comment on that if you want. That's an angle I haven't looked a whole lot into, but you triggered my nerdy side, and want to see where you're going with that. You can explain it here. Immunity, right? I'm not well versed on the different types of immunity. Obviously, if you did not have a significant infection, I know you have different immunity cells than if you had significant infection, and they assume people, obviously if you were asymptomatic, you hardly have any, they don't know if you've had much immunity at all and how long that's going to be left over. So maybe, so I think that's the kind of some studies say 18 months. I mean, that would be awesome. And I believe that's probably true. So we'll go with the low end of 3 to 4 months as being the likely length of time at which people have the strongest immunity, or some immunity, or whatever. We're gonna cut it off at that just for the sake of math. So we're gonna try to calculate how close we are to herd immunity. Now I have a second, another website that was gonna go along with this, and I didn't write it down. I don't want to switch off the camera, which is also my phone. So you're gonna have to just, if you require it, I'll post the link in the comments of this, or I'll make a new post. Whatever anybody would want, ask the question. I can provide all the backup to everything that I'm talking about here. So if we're going to try to calculate herd immunity, you have to understand that we're sitting at 28 million infections, which is what I have right here. But at the same time, it's important to understand that far more people than have been confirmed have actually had the virus. And this isn't a number that's in space. CDC actually tries to keep a running scientific database in regards to how they project where we're at in regards to the amount of people that were asymptomatic to the amount of people that were actually symptomatic. And as of the most recent study results, they have that at a factor of 8. So that's the important number to remember. So in order to do the math, and we're going to limit it to 4 months, understanding that people might have immunity for a lot longer. Some people might have it a little bit less, but for the general scope, we're going to balance things out pretty good. So we're going to try to go back 4 months and get a total. So this is my infections per day. This is pretty straightforward. So we're going to go back here to January 17th. It's right here. We're going to keep going. There's 1 month. December 17th we passed is 2 months. November 17th is 3 months. And we're going to go back to October 17th. Will be 4 months. We'll finish clicking on that. We'll come down here and we'll pick the sum. Okay? That is 19,905,429. That's how many symptomatic confirmed cases we had in the United States over that time period. So I'm just going to pull up my calculator, and what we're going to do now is we're going to multiply that by the factor of 8. So we'll do 19,905,429. Yeah, you can't see the calculator. I'm doing it off screen. We're going to multiply that by 8. Gives us 159,243,432. That's how many people within the last 4 months have likely had some sort of COVID infection, whether it was symptomatic or asymptomatic. So if we're talking about herd immunity for COVID, they've been talking about us having, initially it was thought 65 to 70% of the population, because that is what it was for most other diseases. But since then, Dr. Fauci decided to move the goalpost and push it back to 85 to 90%. So we're going to go with the 85% as the magic number. So we take that 159 million, and we have to realize that there's also more to it now than that. So as of February 10th, we had at least 32 million first doses of the vaccine that were dispersed, which gives, after a week or so, all of the vaccines I'm aware of gave pretty high protective percentages. So we're going to add in 32 million is 191,243,000. We'll just round, so 191 million. And then we have to realize that was only February 10th. So since then, we've been administering about 1.7 million vaccinations per day. So this is 10 days later on the 20th. So we're going to round up here, approximately 20 million more. So, and we'll cut it back a little bit. We'll just go with 15 million. 15 million. I'm doing this math late, so if anything seems squirrely, let me know. So we're actually looking people with some sort of immune protection of some sort at being 206 million. So we're then going to divide that by the amount of people in the United States, which is about 325 million. And we get a percentage of 63, going to round up 64%. So we're right on that threshold of where we originally thought herd immunity would last. And if we're trying to get to 85, 90%, this is something that we're going to be climbing to pretty quickly if we can get more of the vaccines administered in the near future. So could this be a factor in why we're seeing the numbers magically drop since the holidays are over? Because once again, it's clearly not mitigation efforts. We've kind of dispelled the idea of that all across the United States. So as we're going lower and lower, that could be one of the speculative answers that I put out for the data. I think that's going to be it. It is heading towards 1:45 in the morning, so I think I've run through everything I can for tonight. If any of this does or doesn't make sense, leave comments, ask questions. When you're catching this, I'm assuming this is all going to save to Facebook. It better, or I'm going to be really unhappy about it. But I want to thank everybody that joined me at such a ridiculous hour. I want to thank all my girls who came in and showed some support and made me laugh to get things started. And we'll see if we can do another one of these soon. So thanks a lot for your time, and I'm going to wrap it up. Get the facts.